Having an impact, helping people, fostering and nurturing meaningful relationships, making a difference. These goals are what give many people purpose in life. Lohre discovered his purpose when he was 19 and has made it his life's work to fulfill that purpose ever since. The fruits of his labor can be seen in the lives of his family and those he encountered throughout his years. In the spring of 2017, his family, including all 7 of his daughters and all their families, got together to delve deeper into the truly amazing life of Lohre.
Your 7 daughters are here right now, and I think we want to start at the beginning, the very beginning.
My father was 47 years old when he got married. He was a pioneer in southwest Minnesota. When they all came from Norway, because you have to know there was a migration of Norwegians into Minnesota in the mid-1800s by the hundreds, thousands. The only thing he could do was to wait for some more immigrants to come from Europe, mostly all, of course, Scandinavian countries. And finally, there were some others that came, and he was a farmer who had done well in his farming and had a threshing crew. I'm talking about a huge threshing machine with all kinds of equipment. And he would go from farm to farm, and he would thresh the wheat and the rye and the barley and the corn and everything, and he made a lot of money at it. He had his own farm, big farm, but he also made a lot of money doing this threshing. And so he had enough money, he needed somebody to clean his house, and so he hired a young lady who had come over from Norway. Well, no, she hadn't come, she was born here, but her family had come from Norway. And she was 20 years old, and he asked her to come every week and clean her house. And she said, I never knew that he had eyes for me. But then one day I looked at him and I thought, he's a pretty nice looking man. And she started thinking about him, and he started thinking about her. And before they got married, he was 47, she was 20. How rare and how odd. Well, then life really began for them, and 11 children were born thereafter, and I'm the last. And he was 64, actually, when I was born. Well, I was raised on a farm, and I was there until I was 13 years old. And on the farm, really, life is actually very simple, but a lot of work. I mean, we walked to school, come home, we had chores to do. I always had to feed the chickens and the hogs and milk the cows, and I mean, it was just plain hard work, but I never thought of it as hard work. You just do it, you know. It's funny how life on the farm is, you just, like you say, do whatever has to be done.
What was your father like?
My father? Oh, he was really, he was a Norwegian. One day you'll kind of know what that means. But right now it just means that he was a farmer, and he spoke Norwegian all the time. And when I got to be 5 years of age, he told our whole house, no more Norwegian, we got to speak English. We're in America now, and I'm not going back to Norway, so we're going to speak English. So he had to learn English, and he spoke English and read English. But he was very old when I was born, but I didn't know that. He was 64 years old when I was born, so he was like an old man, but I didn't know he was an old man. We used to go play baseball out on the field. My father he could do everything. He could farm, he could build, he could fish. I don't know anything he couldn't do that people did back then. Actually, he one time built a road. He had oxen. Oxen are cows, male cows for the most part, and built a road to our driveway, to our house. So he was quite a man, yeah.
I wanted to know, do you have a favorite memory of you and your dad when you were little?
Oh, I do. It's fishing, probably. No doubt it is fishing. But there's something more to it than that. Because when I was about 4 years old, I had an allergy, hay fever. And in Minnesota, it was very, very serious. So they had to get me out of where I lived to a northern part of Minnesota where these weeds didn't grow. So my dad would take me up to northern Minnesota every fall, when harvest time and all that. And so I would not succumb to this allergy so badly. So anyway, when we would go up north, we always went to a lake, always got a cabin, always went fishing, every day. So, I mean, I can simply say my dad and fishing is the big item. Yeah.
What was your relationship like with Grandma and Grandpa?
Okay, my mother, again, I'm the last of 11 children, and I actually remember her saying to Effie, my oldest sister, you got to comb his hair and you got to make sure he washes his hands and so forth before meals. So I was kind of turned over to Effie, and I didn't mind that. Effie was a very good sister. But so to say that my mother was directly involved in dressing me or clothes, and that wasn't so. It was the oldest sister. Of course, there's the Lohre side, which everybody knows, the name Lohre. But on my mother's side, her name was Nelson, her maiden name. And she was in a home that was really and truly a Christian home. And so when I was growing up, my mother would say to me, you must be born again. It was her favorite and important thing to say to every one of us kids. There were 11 of us, I'm the youngest, and she would say, you must be born again. And we knew, all of us, that was an essential part of becoming a Christian. And but her family had broken away from the state church, and they were called Evangelical Free Church. And they were godly and loved the Lord, and that's where the spiritual heritage comes from, and I don't think anybody knows that in my family. And then I can remember a few things that were family related that really affected me. Okay, the first was my next oldest sister was named Lucille, and one day she's ironing clothes, which is an endless thing. And I don't know what I had done, but I must have had a look on my face, and she says, don't pout. And how do I remember this? The only thing I remember from my sister Lucille growing up was don't pout. And I thought to myself, well, I won't do it again. I mean, that's what I thought in my mind, whatever it is, and I never pout. And the same thing happened with my other brother, Leonard. Harold had gone into the Navy, World War II, was out in the South Pacific. So it was just my brother Leonard and myself on the farm, and I'm only 6 and 7 years of age. And of course, I was expected to get up and milk cows. Yeah, 6, 7 years of age, believe it or not. And so I came in and I threw my clothes, my coat from the cold winter air on the floor behind the door. And Leonard says, don't be lazy. I just about died. I thought to myself, that's the last name I ever want to be called in my whole life. Don't be lazy. It was just like the worst sin ever you could commit. And I vowed that day I would never be lazy again. And I can tell you to this day, I still think about I don't want to be lazy.
Us grandkids heard that you were chased by bulls when you would walk to school. Can you tell us about that?
That I still dream about it. I'll tell you what, Zoe, I still actually have dreams about bulls chasing me. And because here's what happened. When I was 5 years old, and I did start school at 5, and I had to walk, in this case, only 1 mile. That seems like a long, but not. It was just a mile. But on that way to school, there was a farmer who had a bull that was very, very vicious. And whenever us kids would walk by, and of course I had to walk with my sister Evelyn and my other sister Joanne and also Muriel. So I had 3 sisters and myself. We had to walk to that school. And these bulls would come and chase us. This particular bull was very bad. And I remember being chased over and over again. And one time the bull actually jumped the fence and crossed the ditch and the road and everything, and I'm the little boy left behind, and everybody else has run for cover, and they got to a neighbor's house, but I'm still running in this field, and I lose my shoe. By the way, it's still out there if you want to go to try to find it. And it was terrifying, but I got away. I'm still alive, so the run from the bulls.
What were you like as a child?
Okay, I'm going to give my own evaluation. I was very shy. I was very quiet. And So I just think, and I was really very obedient. I mean, all that my father and mother have to do is look at me, and I'd shape up. I mean, it was just a real. I actually only once remember a real spanking, although I'm sure maybe they did some other disciplines that I don't remember. But only one time when I crawled up our kitchen cupboard. And it fell down on me and broke all the dishes. So that was the one time I got licking because they had told me not to.
I remember straw in the backyard and you all smoking the straw or something
Okay,
like
well,
that.
some mischievous things was, yes, everybody wanted to try smoking. I mean, including all the sisters and brothers preceding me. I'm the last of the last. So we'd roll straw and smoke them, and that was all there was to it. And if you get caught, you're told not to do it. But I suppose everybody did it. Yeah.
So I remember when I was little, I had a shirt that was called, or said on it, "Born to Boogie." And I know this goes back to the Navy, but you had the nickname Boogie. So I want to know how you got it.
It actually goes before the Navy. This is really a surprise. In World War II, there was a group called the Andrews Sisters. They sang a song. It was a World War II song that was entitled Boogie Woogie. And it was a real lively song. And I am now 5 or 6 years old. They're older than I am at that time. And I heard the song on the radio. And of all things, I memorized it almost right away, and I began to dance. And I danced the Boogie Woogie. And it was really a Boogie Woogie dance song, and I learned it, and guess what? From then on, I was Boogie. They even called me Boogie Woogie for a while, but that was short-lived, just Boogie. And I maintained that name all the way through high school. Nobody even knows, they didn't even know my first name. In fact, I never went by my first name. No one even knew my name was Leroy, which I didn't care about either. So I was happy when people started calling me Lee, not Boogie.
He's the Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy of Company B.
What is the story behind, I remember you would never let any of us kids walk behind you. If you were sitting at the kitchen table, we were not allowed to be behind you. There was like an insecurity there. What was the story behind?
Well, it wasn't insecurity. It was plain remembrance of people who called Evelyn and Joanne, who every time I had you know what a flat top was back in those days. Well, I had a flat top. And every time they walked by me, they would take one hair and pull it. Just not 2 hairs, 1 hair. And so this went on for probably, I think, 3-4 years. Every time they walked behind me, they'd grab a hair. Well, of course, that makes you paranoid. So that's what happened. I don't like people behind me yet.
You like school?
Oh, yeah, okay. Well, I did like school, but actually I probably should have studied a little bit more than I did. But I walked to school, and then I would walk home from school. And every time I walk home from school, I would there was a little creek, I would see if I could catch some fish. And sometimes we didn't even have a hook, but we would try to catch some fish even with our hands. So we had always had a little place to fish. And then, but school, I guess I would say I met a lot of friends and I had a good time in school, and I'm really glad I went.
What was your favorite book when you were a kid?
That's a really good question because I didn't have any books when we were a kid. On our farm, it's strange, there were no books. The only 2 books that were in the whole house was a Bible that my grandmother read, and then there was a dictionary. And I'm a little boy, and I don't even know better. I just read the dictionary. I read the dictionary. That was my favorite book. I read it year after year. And the fact of the matter is, I don't even know when I learned to read. I just read that dictionary. My favorite book.
I was wondering, what was your favorite meal that your mom made when you were a kid?
There were only a few. It's funny. It's probably pork chops. I just remember, there's no doubt about it. Pork chops and mashed potatoes and corn. That's not only the favorite meal, was common. That was it. Yeah.
What was your 9th birthday like?
9th birthday. Well, you know, because I was the youngest of 11 children, sometimes, sorry to tell you, they didn't even remember my birthday. And when I was 9 years old, no one even remembered my birthday.
That is sad.
That's true. That's actually true. So the answer is from 7, 8, and 9, and 10, and 11, I don't remember anybody saying happy birthday to me. But when I was 12, they did.
Did you ever have any pets growing up?
Oh, yes, I did. We had a dog, a collie dog named Pal, which I could actually ride him. I was a little boy. I was just skinny and little, and I could ride on my collie dog all the way down to the pasture and get the cows. We didn't send the dog for the cows. I could ride the dog to the cows and come back. So I loved that dog. And then after he died, I had a little rat terrier, and that's exactly what he was. He was a terror to the rats on our farm because we had rats where the corn was. So I loved my little rat terrier. And then I don't dare forget a cat named Minnie. Minnie was a cat that would sit on my shoulders when I'm a little boy and never leave. Just cat on my shoulders. That's it.
Tell us about your horse.
And, okay, a number of things about growing up on the farm. My brother came home from the Navy after World War II, and then and I'm just now I'll say I'm 9 or 10, no more than that, maybe about 9 or 10 years old. And they had it in their mind that they wanted to get me, and that was pretty nice of these brothers, a pony. So they went out to North Dakota. Now this is Badlands, we're talking prairie yet. And they went out and they captured a wild horse on the prairie, a pinto pony, and first rope ever on him, they put on him, and they brought him back in a truck, and they opened up the barn door, let him in, and of course he was wild as any could. It took weeks and weeks for them to go in that barn and finally get his attention enough so they could put a rope on him. It must have been 6 months before I actually got on his back, but then he was my horse, and his name was Spike. And I rode Spike, no saddle, all bareback, no real fancy anything. It was an Indian pony, and I was pretending I'm an Indian. I mean, it was just that way. And then when I joined the Navy, I had to let my brother Harold take care of him. And one day he wrote me a letter and said, Spike got into the barn and into a bag of oats, and he ate himself to death. I had to bury him today.
I remember Spike because you used to braid our hair.
Oh, that's
And you used
true.
to say that you used to braid Spike's
Oh,
mane.
yes. I learned how to braid hair because Spike had a long mane and a long tail, but I didn't do much with the tail. But I did braid his mane all the time, and I learned how to braid, real thin strands and real wide strands, and it looked pretty cool. But those years are very interesting because I don't remember I never had any bad times. Maybe you live in a dream world, but I really never did have any bad times on the farm.
At age 13, Lee and his family moved from their farm to the small town of Storton, Minnesota. When Lee was age 15, his father passed away.
I was going to ask about if you could just share the circumstances around your father's death and how that affected you and the aftermath of that.
It is funny about that. My father had gotten kind of sick for a few days, and so I guess I had expectations that he would die, but I never thought of him as an old man. I never ever remember him being old. So that was a surprise. But I was 15, and at 15, and you're a male, and you're out there in that part of the world, you're not expected to over-grieve or to feel too sorry for yourself. And so I would say I just, in a sense, took it as a matter of course, and that's pretty bad to say, but I wasn't really emotionally torn up by my father's death, and I'm not sure why. Okay.
How old was he?
I was 15.
But how old was he?
And he was 78.
Okay.
Yeah. almost 79, I guess.
So what was your first job and where was it?
My neighbor was the editor of the newspaper, the local newspaper. And he asked if I would come in and clean up his office. And so I was hired to clean up his office, and I was a janitor in that office. But then he realized some more skills about me, and he actually had then hired me to be his proofreader. Now, I am just 15 years old, and I'm proofreading all the stuff because, remember I told you as a little boy I read the dictionary? So I knew how to spell all the words, and I knew the meanings to them, and I was his best proofreader. So I ended up doing that in the printer's office. And then, of course, later on, I got a job as a janitor at the school. And quickly, I went from there to work in a pea factory in Blue Earth, Minnesota, and we all know about the Jolly Green Giant. So it was where the Jolly Green Giant is out in the field yet to this very day, and that's where I worked as a factory worker. And then my last job in Minnesota was climbing up these old big silos where they store corn, and I'd have to climb up 30, 40 feet, open up a door, go inside the silo and just rake all the corn on the top so it wouldn't mold, crawl back down, and all hard work and very interesting, and those are my youthful jobs.
Didn't you work at a movie theater?
Oh, that's a little sideline. Oh, yes. I'm sorry, I did. I worked for 3 years in the movie theater popping popcorn. But of course, at that time, you also had to usher people in. So I was ushering people in and popping popcorn. And that's right. I loved sports at that point. I played basketball, and I got to be really pretty good at basketball. And I'm not trying to give my own assessment on that. We actually went to state tournament and did well. And I devoted myself to being a skillful shooter. I wasn't that great with everything else. I wasn't that tall. I wasn't everything else. But I tell you what, I used to say, if you get me the ball, it's in. I mean, that was all of it. And that sounds arrogant here today, but it was the humble truth. I was just a deadeye, and we won all the games because if they get me the ball, if they could get the ball to me, then we'd win. It was just that easy. And then of all things, I had the record of scores in that town, stored in Minnesota, until, of all things, my nephew, Mike Lohre, came along, and he outdid my score, so he's got the school record forever. So.
All right, I wanted to ask you a question, because I remember you telling me when you were driving me to Shoney's, my first job, that you used to be in I thought it was a country western band, it might have been a group, but I remember you telling me that because I had a penchant for liking country music, and you said you'd never told anybody else, like any of the sisters, and that you were in it. And I was like, never said anything to anyone about it, and when I brought it up, nobody knew, so.
Well, how about that? Well, okay, it's true. It wasn't really a band, but it was a group. We called it a musical group. I'll never forget Jim Davidson. He was on the banjo or guitar. And then there was another fellow who was on the piano. So it was just a guitar or banjo and piano, and then me. I'd sing. And I'd sing country western songs. Slowly I'm falling more in love. I had them all down. And Hank Williams, Big His Day. And, it was so, we would sing, and it was called the Log Cabin. It was really a beer joint, just a little club. And so every Saturday night we'd head for the Log Cabin, and we'd sing and play and, I won't say drink, but that's what we did.
Was this while you were in the Navy, or?
No, this is before. This is high school years. But I was popular in high school. I did a lot of things. I mean, I was in sports. I was actually in a chorus. I lettered in all these things in gymnastics and did class plays and but I mean I wasn't seeking to be popular, but when I look back at it, everybody liked me. They still try and contact me yet, those that are still alive.
Didn't you and Grandma Elvina date at the same time? I remember stories about that.
Okay, I'm in high school, and I'm 16, 17, and I'm dating, and my father had died when I was 15. Well, then 2 years later, she meets a man, my mother meets a man that she likes. And of all things, I couldn't believe this. And she went on a diet. I mean, she really went on a diet. It was tuna and salad. And I'm on a diet. It was just me and my mother at the house. At that time, Evelyn had gone off to college. So here we are dieting, and she got down to a weight that she was comfortable with, and she dated this man. And I come home from one night from a date, and here's my mother sitting in the car with a man home from a date at the same time. I mean, can you imagine this? I had a fun and good high school, and but I had no future in Minnesota at that point. The farm, my oldest brother got the farm, and the other brother bought a farm. There was no farm work I could do, and so I knew when I finished high school, either I had to join the military or go to college, and I had no money to go to college, so I joined the military. And so I'm 17 years old and joined the Navy, had to get my mother's signature to get in. I took a lot of tests to find out what I was skilled to do, you know, so it ended up, after boot camp, that they sent me to a radio school. And the radio school was like electronics school and radio sort of combined. And these were considered sort of, you know, pretty good type of schools and pretty good job in the Navy. So I went to Norfolk, Virginia, and I learned the International Morse code. You know what I'm talking about, and so I'm learning the entire code. And then, of course, they sent me to a ship, an aircraft carrier out in Bremerton, Washington. So I went from Great Lakes to Norfolk to Bremerton and Seattle, Washington. And while I was in Seattle, Washington, they also sent me to a little island out there called Bainbridge Island to do some specialized training. But this story has a lot more to it than what I've already begun. Because when I left Norfolk, Virginia, on an airplane to fly all the way 8 hours to, in those days it was 8 hours, to get to Seattle, Washington, I had been thinking about my relationship to Christ, my salvation. My mother had said, "You must be born again." I knew I needed to be saved. And on that airplane, I was under serious conviction of sin. I will tell you that, you know me, she called me stoic, and it's somewhat true, but I cried almost the entire time on that airplane, and I wondered what everybody else around for a while would think about me. But I had a conviction of sin in a way that I said I knew if I died, I'd go to hell. I had no doubt in my mind about it. Not only that, but I knew that what my whole life was like, that if the direction I was pursuing now would continue, it would just be a disaster. I will tell you that if any story you've ever read of any man who ever had conviction in his heart over his sin and his relationship to God, it was Lohre. I was on that airplane, and when I got off, I thought to myself, woe was unto me. Well, here I am. I get off the airplane, go to the ship, check in. It's in dry dock, meaning under repairs. And so I have a lot of time on the weekends, and I went into Seattle, and one night of all, or not really night, one afternoon, there's a lady singing in the street. I'll never forget it, 4th and Pine. I could take you there right now if I had a chance. It's a famous street right down. I even Googled it. I can see 4th and Pine right now in Seattle, Washington. And this lady was singing a song, a gospel song, really beautiful. I couldn't believe it. It was almost operatic, the way she was able to sing. And I had to talk to her. I had to say, that was beautiful, just being nice. I'm in my sailor uniform, white sailor outfit. And she said, "You want to go to church with me tonight?" I said, "Well, I don't know." And so strange things happen. I got in her car and rode with her to a gospel meeting in a part of Seattle I have no idea. And there I was challenged to receive the Lord Jesus Christ. I was hesitant and everything, but I tell you what really did happen. When I went back to that ship and I got in my bunk, I knew for sure that's the day I had to receive Jesus Christ to take away my sin. I knew that there was, beyond a shadow of doubt, like I say, that I needed Christ. I knew I was a sinner. I knew I was lost. And there, in my own heart, I received Jesus Christ, and I just went to sleep. It was a decision. It was a relationship. It was, Jesus, come in. I'm yours. It's it. I woke up the next day, and it is absolutely true. The grass was greener and the skies were brighter. I had the burden of sin was gone. I'm a new man in Christ Jesus. I immediately sought fellowship in Christianity, and I began reading the Bible. It was the greatest thing. I thought, where have I been all my life? I wondered whatever happened to me. It was a conversion that was real, and I'm going to tell you something. It's the same in my mind today as it was back then.
I remember something you telling us about a song they used to sing to you to make fun of you after you got saved.
Yeah. After we got the ship repaired, and every time I'd come down into the compartment, there were 40 men that slept in a compartment about the size of this room. I mean, all bunk beds and so forth. And every time I'd come down, they'd start singing, "I saw the light, I saw the light, praise," all making fun of me. But before that cruise was over, we had about 23 men called the Hornet Christian Fellowship. I'll never forget it. I got documentation on that and how we would meet together and pray. These are men who, when they would go on liberty in the past, I mean, liberty, yeah, that's a good word. They went on liberty. Whatever woman they could find, whatever beer joint they could find, that was life. Now they were Christians. It's amazing.
And this ship was the USS Hornet, correct?
Yeah, USS Hornet.
Was it an aircraft carrier?
It was an aircraft carrier, and in fact, it's the namesake of the 30 Seconds Over Tokyo. If you ever saw that movie, it's where they bombed Tokyo off the USS Hornet. Those pilots didn't even get back to the ship. Many of them just crashed either into China or into the sea. It's an amazing story. And I was happy to be on that aircraft carrier. I was in communications, just like I said, all the ships, all the airplanes that flew off that ship, and you had to keep in contact with them, and they came back on the ship, and then you had to ship to ship and ship to shore and all that, that's Navy talk. But that was my job, and I liked it. And within 2 years, I was second-class radioman, and if I hadn't got out of the Navy, I'd have been career. So that would have been my life. But becoming a Christian changed everything. I knew I couldn't be happy just doing that.
Well, I have a question about you went to Japan, right? And you were in some ping pong. Some ping pong championships.
My object lesson with me today. Yeah, well, the first cruise we went to Japan. I was on 2 cruises to Japan, to the Far East. They're 6-month cruises. So I was 6 months in Japan and Hong Kong and those areas. And then we came back, and then we went 6 more months. But in one of those cruises, I was a good ping pong player aboard ship. And so when we were challenged to have a ping pong tournament in Japan, of course, I'm one of 5 that were selected to be a competitor in a ping pong tournament in Shimoda, Japan. You wouldn't know that name, except it was where the first American ships came into Japan that had been closed for centuries and broke the trade agreements and all that sort of thing, but that's neither here nor there. So I got in this ping pong tournament, and of all things, I am the only one of the 5 that is facing a girl. They have a girl ping pong player on the other side, and she just was such a little thing, and she gets up there and you play 2 games. The first game, she whipped me so bad, it was just embarrassing. I mean, I think I got 10 points. I mean, out of 21, in case you don't know. So I had to play her second one because it was 2 games. And the next time, I don't even know if I got 5 points. She just I'm the best player on the ship, or near best, and she just wiped me out totally. And they gave me a little souvenir to take home with me, like one of those things that says, sorry you lost, but here's a little remembrance.
So you visited a lot of countries. Which one is your favorite country that you've ever visited?
Japan. I just say it without hesitation. I loved the Philippines. I loved Hong Kong. And of course, there are many other places in between. I can say I loved Hawaii, but of course, that's not a foreign country. And the beautiful Hawaii is, but I have to say, there's something about Japan at that time. Its beauty, its culture. It was just everything. I loved it.
So the one question I have, I'll put you on the spot. Since you were in the Navy, I wondered if you ever had a tattoo.
Oh,
most
okay.
Navy men I know.
In fact, I am probably the only man aboard my ship, USS Hornet, 3,000 men on this carrier. I'm probably the only one that didn't have a tattoo. But I'll tell you why. I had an older brother that was in the Navy, and he had gotten a tattoo of skull and crossbones on his shoulder. And he always was ashamed of it. I don't know why, but he didn't. And he looked at me before I joined the Navy. He says, "Don't you get a tattoo?" I had no idea. It was just that simple. He says, "Don't get a tattoo." But I love my brother Harold, and he says, "Don't get a tattoo." And so sure enough, 100 times he tried to get me drunk to get a tattoo, but it never happened. That's a simple story.
Have you ever eaten dog meat?
Oh my goodness, that's a terrible story. It's a terrible story. Well, actually, I told the story. I was in the Philippines. I was in the Philippine Islands, and I was in the Navy many years ago. And there was a missionary there that said there was a tribe of people in the mountains that invited us to come for a festival, for a feast. And so I was in the Navy, and all of us sailors went to this feast, and they had dog meat for food, I should say. And actually, Lincoln, I didn't eat it. I was tricky. But I was served dog food, but I really actually didn't. So I'm glad to tell you I didn't really eat dog meat.
Okay, good.
Aren't you glad?
Yes.
Well, from there, you went to college, and then your ministry. Can you tell us about that?
Right, okay. I had, as a Christian, I was going to a couple of servicemen centers in the States as well as overseas, and when I went through a newspaper one day, I think it was the Sword of the Lord, I saw a list of colleges. There was something like, well, there were a lot of colleges, but I wrote to 18 of them. 18 colleges I wrote to and asked for admission, and only one sent a letter back, Bob Jones. I mean, I got letters later on from Moody and Wheaton. I was accepted in all those schools, Multnomah and so on. However, the only one that could get me out of the Navy in time to start the fall semester was Bob Jones University. So I got off the ship, I saved money I had aboard ship, and I bought a 1953 Chevrolet car right in the parking lot. I'm 20 years old. I drive straight from San Diego, California to Bob Jones campus. Didn't know a single person, didn't know anybody along the way, and I drove nonstop. It's hard to believe. 2 days through Texas and all, that old 1953 Chevrolet, come on campus. Checked in at the desk and went into the dormitory and began my studies as a preacher boy. So then I went on 4 years and got my BA, bachelor's in Bible, went on further and got my master's in another year in Bible, and then but meanwhile, the first year of my college, having visited lots of servicemen centers and then learning that there was a new servicemen center in Augusta, Georgia, that had been started by Jenny's brother and friends. That's an interesting connection, isn't it? That's how things happen. But he was part of a group that started that work right here in Augusta. And I came down to visit it in October of 1958, the first time I ever came into Augusta, Georgia. And then the Servicemen Center there was another man who was in charge named Don McKinley, and he had to leave and go to Michigan. And so the center would either die, or it was put in my hands to be the executive director, or at least a temporary director. And here's how I say, I didn't start the Servicemen Center, but I did establish it. And I incorporated it and built from there. If you're catching time, we're in the 60s now, and the Vietnam War has begun, and we're talking soldiers by the thousands and thousands. We would sometimes have 600 servicemen walk into this building in a weekend. We would give them cake and coffee and refreshments. And we would try. We had 30 Bob Jones students on Saturday, 30 Bob Jones students on Sunday. We had students from Columbia Bible College, students from Toccoa Bible College that would come in and help. And we witnessed every soldier we could. Sometimes we'd have 100 men who would receive Christ on a given weekend. There are literally thousands and thousands. I have files. I have files of the names of thousands of soldiers who were saved. I sometimes look through the files and I see the names of all these guys I know from the past. Norm Chapman, I can just name the list, and they lead many souls to Christ, and I'm happy to have my name on quite a few of those cards. I just would say it was an amazing, fruitful ministry. And at the same time that this was happening, the soldiers of Vietnam, I mean, this is an important point in our American history. It was not a popular war with all the other things, but it seemed like almost half of the soldiers that would come into the Servicemen Center were African Americans. And I'm going to tell you something. When they would come into our place, they were angry by the time they got to the door, because to get to our place, they had to pass by some restaurants, which they were not allowed to go into. They had to pass by the bowling alley, which they couldn't get into. They couldn't get into any restaurants, and they weren't allowed to any of the stores. The only thing that was open was one or two stores like Woolworths and Greens. And so when they got to our place, they were already upset over the fact that they were here, they were fighting for our country, but they had no opportunity to even be a part of a society. And of course, that part was very touching to me. In addition to that, I had a couple of young kids on the streets selling peanuts and newspapers, little 12-year-olds, and they were inner city kids who I got attached to. I have a picture. I wish I had it in my hand right now, but I have a picture over there that I'm gonna let you see. It's a picture of me with a bunch of the teenage boys. There were some girls in it too. But anyway, it was a moment in time in which I knew God was using me to reach out to the inner city of Augusta. And it's what began really what was called the New Life Club. So here we have the Servicemen Center, and now I'm working with a lot of these inner city kids. As many sometimes as 125 people would be in these very two rooms. This one's right here, and most of them led to Christ, became Christians. I even have a picture of one of the young men who was 17 years old is sitting beside me, and he came back. He's 67 years old right now, and I got a picture of him and the two of us sitting side by side. And these are men who love the Lord, and so we had an amazing ministry with what we call the inner city.
Do you remember your first sermon that you ever spoke from a pulpit, and what was it?
Okay, the first sermon I ever preached was actually in that building, 737 Broad Street, and it was a gospel sermon, and it was really Romans 1:16. I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it's the power of God unto salvation to everyone that believeth, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. I stood up in front of those soldiers and preached the gospel for the first time in my life, fearfully, and that was a simple gospel message. But actually, I've preached a couple of sermons a lot of times. There's 2 or 3 important sermons that I've preached, and I hope I've got them recorded somewhere, I don't know. But I've preached a sermon on Jehoshaphat. If you haven't heard the sermon on Jehoshaphat, you need to hear it. You've heard it. And the second one, really, that I've preached a lot about is God's remedy for man's ruin. And it really is theological. It's the most heavy theological sermon I've ever preached. Man's fall, God's remedy for fallen man.
In 1964, Lee first met Jenny Blau, who would eventually become his wife.
Well, it's the meeting was not a romantic one because I met her in Pennsylvania. Let me go back a little bit. I knew her brother Les. We were good friends. He would come down to Augusta, and we decided we wanted to go to the World's Fair. And the World's Fair was in 1964. I hate to date all these things, but 1964 was the World Fair in New York. And so Les and I wanted to go. But the way in which Les would have money to get to the World's Fair was to go to Pennsylvania and get it from her, because she was working. So we drove. I drove to Pennsylvania, and she was already, I think, engaged to somebody else, something like that. And then Les just wanted money, so I met her. She looked young, and that's about the story. But then she came along to the World's Fair. So we rode all the way to New York and all that together. But because she was interested in somebody else, it was just like my best friend's kid sister.
Let's stop there for a minute. Tell us more about that, Mom.
Actually, I was engaged to somebody else during the time, so I didn't think much about it. But after maybe the first 2 days of traveling, I thought, you know, he kind of like him. But then nothing was done or said to when he went back to Georgia and I was in Pennsylvania. Nothing was. I was working and happy, and that's about it until we met again.
Right, I remember hearing a story about littering and Mom throwing something out the window. I want to know when this was and what happened.
I still am mad over that.
Well, all I know is I was driving the car, but she'll have to tell us when exactly.
We were on the way out to the New York Fair at 5 o'clock in the morning. I'm in the back seat putting makeup on, okay? And he and my brother in front. And we live in the country in Pennsylvania. That's where I'm from, the country, where whatever you don't want in the car, you throw out the window. And I was in the back seat, and I had a Kleenex and wiping, smudging or whatever. And I opened the window and threw it out. And he goes, stopped the car, and I couldn't figure out what's wrong, you know. I said, what happened? I was a little afraid of him anyway. So he stopped the car, and he said, did you throw something out the window? I thought I saw you throw Kleenex or something out the window. I said, yes. He says, go back and get it. He actually said that. Well, he said that to me, and I couldn't believe it. I kind of laughed, but he meant it. So I actually had to get up and go find that Kleenex in the bushes and come back and get in the car. Not another word said. That was it. But that was not good.
At least you didn't drive off when you...
No, I didn't drive off, no. But it was in my mind. I didn't like littering. I still don't. It's okay.
But do you remember that?
Sure, so I remember it. Yeah, but I just at that time, as a matter of fact, I thought if she threw it out, go get it.
Well, she was your friend's kid sister.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, you didn't see
I mean,
her in a certain way yet.
I wasn't trying to be some macho guy. I just said, this is, get it. You know, maybe I was, but that's...
By the way, did I say it was foggy? How he even saw something go out that window? I don't know.
Listen, we all know he has very good eyesight, very good peripheral vision. Massive peripheral vision.
Yes. We met again. She had, I was working at the Servicemen Center, but I was also helping to start a church in Savannah, Georgia.
There was a need for a church where black people could worship freely without segregation.
Many of the black soldiers would come with me, and we'd go visit a local church, and we wouldn't be received in the door. They would just say, we'll find other places for you to go. So they would refuse us to come in. Well, this happened over a period of time. Finally, I said, well, there is a need for a church in this city where anybody can come to. That was it. Just that simple. We didn't call it a black church. We didn't call it a white church. We didn't call it an integrated church. We just called it a church where everybody could come.
So in 1968, Lee started the Bible Chapel. He also started a new life club where young people from the ages of 12 to 18 came on Monday nights to sing, worship, and study scripture. Many came to Christ and were baptized.
So I had planned to be in Savannah the whole time, 6 weeks. I was staying down there with an evangelist by the name of Michael Flowers, and I stayed in his house, and she came down here to cook meals for the workers at the center. So I was gone. She came down here and was doing service for the Lord. Well, of course, I saw her then, too. So we met and had fun and talked, and my sister Evelyn was here and so on. But the truth is, we didn't hook up romantically at that time. So then, if you really want to hear the story, okay, we got a little extra time, so let me tell you. I actually was dating another lady. And they told me that Jenny had gathered some towels and some supplies and all kinds of things for the Servicemen Center. And this was on Bob Jones University campus, and she was a dormitory supervisor. So I stopped by to get all these things that were donated, and I was going to bring them down to the center, and I had my girlfriend out in the car, and I just said, wait out here, and I'll go get them. Well, it was nothing to that, just I'm going in to get these stuff from her. And then I walked into her room, and I said, you know, this is really a beautiful lady. I couldn't get over it. It struck me. And I thought, the girl I have in my car is interesting, but she is too much like me. She was serious and all that.
In 1969, Lee began dating Jenny Blau.
Well, when was your first kiss? How long had you guys known each other, or how long were you dating?
When I was a dorm supervisor at BJ, he asked me to come down and speak at the Valentine banquet to his young people. He had about 25 or 30 people there. So anyway, I gave a funny reading about couples dating and all that. And then Kathy Fellows and Tim were there, and they said, we want you to come over to the house, so we did. And we followed them home, and they went in, and he kept doing stuff to the radio and everything, you know, and I said, shall we go in? He said, yeah, you know. And then he put his arm around me and he kissed me. That was the first kiss.
Valentine's Day.
And I went in there and I couldn't quit laughing. And they kept saying, what's wrong with you, Jenny? And I just laughed and laughed and laughed. But I couldn't tell it because that was personal. So finally, I guess I got over it. But yeah, that was, do you remember that?
Yeah, no, I remember it very well.
Were you nervous?
I was nervous, yes. Yeah.
But that was a long time after dating. That was
probably a year and a half.
A year and a half or more.
Yeah.
Till I got a first kiss. You see how I put that? Till I got the first
kiss. That's right.
Until he gave it to me.
How did you propose to Mom?
Good question.
Okay. Well, I thought it was fairly romantic, but maybe and I think she did too. Yeah. Because, we drove up Paris Mountain. And how far did we get up? I don't even know. We didn't go all the way up Paris Mountain, but we stopped. And I asked her, in fact, we got out of the car. I don't know why we got out of the car.
We were walking.
Walking? Okay. And so I asked her to marry me, and she was happy to do so. And I put on her engagement ring, and she threw her pearl ring away. Threw it. Just threw her valuable pearl ring away into the bushes. So happy to get it, and I'm so happy in that. And it was, I always say it was the first time I gave her a really good kiss. She says she remembers other kisses before that, but I don't remember any kisses before that. That was, I won't say.
Oh, I remember our first kiss.
Okay, but I would say that's when we showed a romantic moment that way. And I actually went and found the pearl ring later on, so in case you wanted to know.
That littering again.
In 1971, Lee and Jenny married at the Blau Mennonite Church in Hallsapple, Pennsylvania.
With the wedding, though, didn't you have a downpour at your wedding?
Oh, it poured down rain, terrible. And all I can remember, I looked upstairs, we were getting dressed, and you came in and you were just soaking wet.
Drenched, yeah.
Just drenched. But the neat part, when the Al Waddell, he pronounced us man and wife. And do you remember what happened? The thunder and lightning, and it rattled the whole church. That little old Mennonite church just shook.
The pronunciation man and wife, and it just...
The church just shook.
Yeah.
It was so crazy, and the lightning, because it was neat.
It was funny.
Where did you go for your honeymoon?
Our plan after in honeymoon was to go to St. Augustine, Florida, which we did. We of course, from Pennsylvania, we'd stop along the way. And I guess we stopped in Bedford, Pennsylvania, and then we traveled from there to Washington, D.C., and spent the night in Washington, D.C., and then finally the next day maybe got down to Florida, St. Augustine. We were there for a week, and we had a great honeymoon, absolutely fabulous, fun, sightseeing. Couldn't have been better. I mean,
it was great.
It was great.
I want to know about Dad during your early years of marriage, and I want to know if he was the romantic type. Did he get you flowers and cards and all that?
Talk about romantic moments. Okay, if there's something romantic about me, it's probably this, that I would sing love songs to her.
Always.
You, I'm in love with you. Well, you don't know these songs; they're back in 100 years ago. But the thing is, I had a lot of songs that I would sing to her. Sometimes all the way from Greenville to Augusta, I'd sing.
That's right.
Well, what is the most romantic thing that Mom has ever done for you?
Well, I gotta tell you something. She's a very romantic woman. Okay, no one's like her. I mean, in all the world, she's just the best to me ever. She's done everything that a man could ever want. I could say she's got me cards. No, there's not even a moment. Everything. She's just been a super wonderful, romantic, loving wife, loyal, obedient, and I don't even care about the obedient part. But I
was going to say.
But I mean, no, there are things, like I'd say, let's go to Africa, and she'd say, if you go. I mean, that's obedient. It may be more than obedience. It's a heart attitude of what we'll do things together. She's been the best partner. Helpmeet is a scriptural word, but it just doesn't fit. For her, it's just our life together. There's no life without her. I mean, that's the way it is. I mean, I'm nothing without her, frankly, and we just fit.
We do. It's perfect. I feel everything he said about him, too.
During the 1970s and 80s, life was busy between balancing family life, being a part of the leadership of the Bible Chapel, and running the Servicemen Center. In 1972, their first daughter, Vashti, was born. In 1973, their second daughter, Candace, was born. In 1977, their third daughter, Lydia, was born. In 1980, their fourth daughter, Katie, was born. In 1982, Lee and Jenny gave birth to twin girls, Cassie and Carrie. In 1986, their seventh daughter, Tara, was born.
Did you ever think, out of all 7 of us, was there ever a time that because I know that y'all didn't find out before we were born that we were girls. So was there ever a time that you thought, like, this one is going to be the boy?
There was one time, and that's when there were 2, when I was having twins. I figured it has to be one of them. One of these has to be a boy, but I was never disappointed, ever. I was happy.
Okay.
Probably, I thought the first one would be a boy. I think maybe all men do.
Okay.
And so I had her name picked out as Lee. No, I'm kidding about that.
It's my middle name.
It's your middle name, but I didn't. I mean, I did think that she probably would be a boy. But after that, it actually didn't matter, and that's I say that honestly and truthfully. It didn't matter whether we had boys or girls, and I don't. And I know it's because of my family. I did have 7 sisters, and so it really didn't matter.
You know, I remember the bench in our kitchen, and whoever sat on that bench, if you were done eating, the 4 would sit on it. But if you were the ones in the middle, the ones on the end refused to let you out. If you were done eating, they would not let you out. And you had to crawl under the table between all these legs to get out. Do you remember? And you would fight and be so mad. You all hated the bench.
Katie has that bench in her house right now that she hated so much.
You just wait, your time's coming.
I'd just like to say, on an appreciation level, I appreciate how you were always around growing up. You were always there for us whenever we needed you. You were home during the day a lot too, and I remember that. And I remember most of all, still to this day, you and Mom in the kitchen having coffee together. Right. And it's a picture to me of your relationship is, even with all the chaos around, with all of us kids, you took time out for each other to sit and have coffee, but you were always there for us as well. And I just want to say I appreciate that.
Well, thank you for that, lady. God bless you.
During the 1980s to early 1990s, life was busy with homeschooling and family trips to Minnesota and Pennsylvania to visit extended family and grandparents.
I kind of want, and it's kind of skipping around, but I wanted to bring up some, number one, what were you thinking when you put everybody and thought about doing these road trips with us? Because I know we went to Minnesota, Pennsylvania, Alaska. And then some small trips. I know sometimes, we couldn't afford that. We'd go to Columbia and go to the zoo, or not even the zoo, we'd go to the mall, but remember Cromer's Peanuts? Yep. And then we would swim in the pool.
Monkeys.
And there were a lot of stories I remember from these trips. I remember riding back from either Minnesota or Pennsylvania with a flower hutch.
Yes.
Do you remember we were sitting in it?
Yes. Well, I remember something that I don't know if it was all of you. Someone gave us a car, and it had a seat going, looking at traffic in the back, the station wagon. Candace, do you remember that?
When it was given to us, it had a bumper sticker that said, "Twins are a gift from God." And Cassie and I would sit in the back facing the traffic behind us.
The twins.
And they would honk and they would smile, and we were like,
I remember when we first got it, we all fought over who got to sit in the back because the door opened like a regular door. And the first time you rode and you had to stare at everybody, then we were like, no, we would like not to.
I remember that too,
yes.
Candace. And then also we would sit backwards, Indian style, in the seats, so that whenever you made a quick stop, we would fall back onto the floor.
Do you remember taking us all to Lamar Drake's to go pick corn and blueberries and everything?
These children may or may not know exactly that we lived by faith. Now, there are two ways to live by faith. You can live by faith with means, and you can live by faith without means, and we were without means. The Drakes were wonderful Christian people, and they actually grew a garden, a large garden with everything in it, corn and vegetables. And one of the reasons they grew it so big is they wanted to help us. They knew we were a missionary family, a Christian family, and so they would invite us down there when the crops were ready, even seasonal. If we came for blueberries, that was first, or then there was corn a little later on. And they, how many bushels of corn did that we used to pick sometimes? 30 bushels of corn. And then, of course, we'd come home and shuck them all and everything to do with it. In fact, I worried a lot. I stressed out a lot about raising 7 girls in the city. And I really didn't want my girls to be city girls. I wanted them to be experienced country girls. In fact, how serious I was about it is we went to Alaska. We'll talk about that some other time. But I said, these girls need to toughen up. And we went into the wilderness, and you had to learn how to, pick berries and everything else. And then also going to Africa. It toughened you up. I just didn't want, I shouldn't put it this way, it sounds a little bad, but I just didn't want Southern belles who didn't know anything more than how to be sweet. I wanted you to be tough and to know everything.
In 1998, 2002, and 2012, Lee and Jenny and some daughters took mission trips to Nigeria with Jacob Maigida, who had and continues to have a fruitful ministry as a native in Jos, Nigeria. Jacob is a part of a ministry team called Bazada with several other men. Jacob travels around parts of Nigeria and other countries in Africa to share the gospel in remote villages and markets. The ministry and trips of Nigeria has been a life-changing experience, and Lee hopes to return in the future if the Lord enables him to.
And of course, we could talk about the most recent time we were in Africa. We had an amazing experience that you can't explain on a human level. It's like God Almighty intervenes in order to take care of us.
What was the grossest food you've ever eaten?
Bush rat. That's exactly the proper answer. Bush rat in Africa. They bring it onto my plate, and it's a rat, and it came from the bush, and they cook it, and it tastes terrible, and you eat it. That's the worst thing I ever ate. That's a terrible thing to say. Ask her, would she?
What was the grossest thing you ate?
Probably bush rat. If I had known what I was eating, Lyra, I didn't, but it was dark. There was no electricity. All there was little candles. And I did eat some bush rat.
I think it's even worse than that. I remember her eating big worms.
Oh, worms too. I found in my rice. Big worms.
No, we had a lot of bad food.
In 2003, a bottle of water, and a Diet Coke started an unlikely ministry within the Chinese community in Augusta, Georgia. David Lin was a significant part of Lee's ministry in sharing the gospel with the employees of over 55 restaurants in the greater Augusta area.
After you all went to college, almost, I'll say all of you having gone to college except Tara, maybe still home. It was just one day that I'm out, and I'll do this quickly. I passed out a Chinese tract to a man who was a restaurant owner. His name is David Lin, we all know him. Anyway, I led him to Christ. And David Lin and we took the time to visit 55 Chinese restaurants and gave tracts and witnessed to every one of the bosses and the workers at all these restaurants. In a period of time, we had won about 27 Chinese people to Christ. A ministry began with the Chinese really after all of you left the nest. And you really don't have, well, you have a lot of ideas, but it was another one of those miraculous things of missions in our lives.
In 2008, Bible Chapel relocated to downtown Augusta, where Lee continued serving in both the Christian Servicemen Center and the Bible Chapel. 2017, Lee planted the Bible Chapel in a new area of downtown, where he's working to revitalize an old 2-room schoolhouse into a place of worship.
Well, after all these years that you guys have been together, what is your favorite thing about each other? Like your favorite character trait?
There's without hesitation 2 things. She loves me and she's funny. I mean, I can just tell you this. There's never a dull moment with her. You just think, 40-some years. She's as fun today as she was 40 years ago. And that's all I can tell you, that I'm the happiest man in the world to marry somebody who had a lot of fun, a lot of sense of humor, and we have a good time.
Well, I don't know where to begin. I'd have to talk a whole day to tell you. And I'm just about ready to you know what. But anyway, I love Dad so much. I love him more than the day I married him. Hope each one of you can say the same thing about your husbands after 46 years. But I will say, I love how he cares and how he shows he cares in so many ways, not just one way or two, but everything he does, I can tell he cares about me and he wants me to be happy. And we get along so well that it's hard to believe it. When I hear some people say how you have to work to keep your marriage happy, I've never had to work to keep our marriage happy, and we often discuss this. We never worked at it. It just came natural that we love each other so much.
And I'll sort of finish this now by saying this. My life, if you want to know what makes me tick, what makes me alive, if you want to know me, I'll tell you what it is. It's not my preaching, it's not any of those other things. I just actually only care about talking to people one-to-one about receiving Christ. If there's anything, that's all that ever's mattered to me. It's never anything else that's ever mattered to me but Matthew 28:19-20. It is what it is. Go ye. I just took it for real. It is what led me to everything that has happened ever since. If it hadn't have been for the idea I want to win people to Christ, none of these other things would have happened. You have to think about some of the things we're not even elaborating on today of what God has done over a period of years. And you know something? It's all with one simple underlying truth. All I and my dear wife ever cared about was to try and win a soul, to win a soul. And it has led to one thing, to another thing, to another thing. And it's a simple obedience to the command of Christ, go into all the world. You follow Jesus, you'll never know what it'll happen. That's still true. You're young. You follow him, you never know what will yet happen. God is a God of miracles. I'm not being phony. He's real. He works. You can trust him. You're supposed to say amen, that's it.
The future is exciting for Lee and Jenny as they continue in their ministry at the church and with others, possible mission trips, and their goal to focus on spending quality time with their 7 daughters, sons-in-laws, and 24 and counting grandchildren.